Good morning. My name is John Wainwright, and it's a privilege to be your worship associate today. So my beads came from my daughter that yesterday Tapestry was at the OC Pride Festival. It was a lot of fun. She got her hair painted and tattoos. So this is the coolest thing for her. If you've been looking for a congregation where your doubts are respected, griefs are comforted, joys are celebrated, your children are taught about other religions, concerns are shared, reason is honored, and your need to serve others is fostered, then perhaps you have found a home. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. For the chalice lighting, the Jones family will come up and light the flaming chalice, the central symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. I guess the Jones family and Lauren. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame within us. Albert Einstein.
Down off the ladder, wash out that paintbrush, shake the sand from your shoes, get up off your muddy knees, and give the garden a break for the morning. Fold up the newspaper, turn off the coffee pot, close up your calendar already filled with dates and times and people and places that claim you. This congregation is ready for you to fill its rooms, to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its light. This congregation is ready for you to make community, to create beauty, to bend it toward justice, and to serve its ideals. This congregation is ready for you to be here, honoring our past, invigorating our present, and dreaming our future. This congregation is your congregation. We are home. We are whole. Welcome to our time of worship together. This morning, we get to do something especially exciting. We get to do a new member recognition, but we'll do that in just a moment. Right now, we will do sorrows and celebrations. Every morning when we gather for worship, we pause to lift up those life-changing events. Some of us do that symbolically by lighting a candle. I see several of them today, actually more than usual. Sometimes people write a message for us to share aloud. I have a message for us today from Barb Daly. It's actually about Nikki. Nikki is in Montana to be with their friends to care for Pat and Ray. Ray's been in hospice and Pat needed a break. So we'll look forward to seeing Nikki back here soon and keep them in our thoughts and prayers. For these and all of the unspoken joys and sorrows, we'll hold them in our hearts and reach out a hand when it's appropriate. Would you join me in reading our congregational response? For your joys, we join you in celebration. For your sorrows and concerns, may you feel our compassion. Now, Bonnie and Carrie, would you join me up here? You do coordinate beautifully. Yeah, that's great. So Bonnie and Carrie, you've chosen to be a part of this community, and we celebrate your presence here. In joining Tapestry, you've agreed to offer your time and your talent and your treasure to help support this congregation. That's not a small commitment. But maybe more importantly, today you're committing to open your heart and your mind to this community to grow together. We look forward to learning from you and with you, and we look forward to helping you as a sense of meaning and purpose unfold in the world. We'll be here with you to celebrate life's joys, and we'll be here also to bear witness to its sometimes painful complexities. We hope we can get to know each of you a little more personally, but for now, I'm going to take a minute to introduce both of you. So Bonnie, in blue, has been a Unitarian Universalist for several decades now. Bonnie has been attending Tapestry since she arrived back here from Burbank about 6 months ago. She's been receiving the newsletter for a long time before that and was pleased to find a congregation that was committed to social justice concerns here in South Orange County. She was also drawn to Tapestry because it's so close to her home in Lake Forest. We're practically neighbors. And she says, since then, I've discovered a community filled with generosity and concern for others. Bonnie tried visiting detainees with the Friends of Orange County Detainee program, but because those rooms are so crowded and loud, she had trouble hearing her detainee, which doesn't work very well when you're trying to visit. But she found her place in our discussion group on race and diversity, and she looks forward to participating more with that in the months to come. As Bonnie gets settled in and works out her transportation, she hopes to sing in the choir and maybe participate in the women's book group and the caring committee. We're thrilled to have you here to share your rich life experience with us and to share your compassionate heart with Tapestry. Welcome. Carrie first attended Tapestry in January of 2012 and attended a few times over the next few years. She and her family have been coming more regularly since the beginning of this year with John and the 3 kids. They were looking for, and this is a quote, a love-based spirituality, a heart-centered approach to varying religious customs and beliefs, a palpable sense of community, a robust youth program, opportunities for service and outreach, and the chance to worship every week in the company of kind, compassionate, courageous people. You are looking for a lot. And they think they have found it here at Tapestry. Carrie is particularly interested in getting involved in the religious education program and the Moms Facing Moms. Actually, you have been involved with those, right?
The Moms Facing Moms I haven't gone to.
Okay. And imagines getting involved more with other committees as time develops. So welcome both. I have a short statement for you guys to read, if you wouldn't mind. Right here. Yep.
We have found inspiration in our new religious home and met warm people here. We look forward to learning and serving more in this beloved community and creating more joy through our shared ministry. Today we join with you as full members of Tapestry, our Unitarian Universalist home.
We are thrilled that both of you have decided to make this your home, and we look forward to getting to know both of you a lot better in the months and years to come. So welcome to Tapestry. And now Caitlin has a story for our young and young at heart, if you want to come and join us up here on the carpet.
Good morning. Good morning, Alex. Yeah, the story of Shabbat. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Piper. Want Want to scooch over so she can? All right, Alex. You're in the play. He's talking about the play, that you were a raccoon. Good memory. All right. So it's called The Story of Shabbat. All right, in the service today, they're going to talk about the Sabbath. I'm going to tell you what Shabbat is. It actually means Sabbath. It's another word. I'm going to tell you. The Sabbath is a special day to the Jewish people. From the moment it begins just before sunset on Friday evening to the moment it ends on sunset on Saturday evening, it has a special feeling. Perhaps this is because the Sabbath is different from all other days of the week. It is a holiday. It is a day of rest. The idea of the Sabbath goes back to the beginning of the world, as the Hebrew Bible tells it. God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. Okay? The seventh day was called the Sabbath. The word Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word, Shabbat, which means rest. Okay? Sunday is the Sabbath for most Christians, all right, which is Sundays today, and Friday is the Sabbath for Muslims. But Saturday has always been the Sabbath to Jews. It is the oldest holiday that they celebrate. And I had the good fortune of having lots of Jewish friends when I was your age growing up, and actually probably 90% of them celebrated Shabbat every Friday with us. And you'll see they have a special dinner and special prayers that they say. The keeping of the Sabbath is a law to the Jewish people. It is an important part of their Torah. Torah is what they call the learning they live by. On the Jewish Sabbath, it is against the law to mourn, against the law to worry, and against the law to work. So a whole day where it's against the law to work. Okay, so or worry, that's the hard one, right? All right, and how this story came to be is the story of the Sabbath. A long, long time ago, a people speaking Hebrew came to live in the land of Egypt. They came with great joy, for one of their tribesmen, Joseph, was already there. He was honored by the Egyptian Pharaoh, so Joseph's people, the Jews, lived there happily for many years. So they were welcomed in Egypt in the beginning. But then another Pharaoh rose to rule in Egypt. He did not like the strangers in his land, and the harder they worked, the more work he gave them to do, and eventually they became his slaves, the Hebrews in Egypt. Slaves are people that don't get a choice whether they work or not. Okay, and you get in big trouble if you don't do what you're told. Yes, these are the slaves working, and these are the people that are telling them what to do. So the Jews became slaves in Egypt. But as the story goes, with God's help, Moses led the Jews out of the land of Egypt. The Bible tells how God looked after them. It tells how God gave them the 10 Commandments as the law for free people to live by. So now that they were free and they got to choose what they did, when they were slaves, you didn't get a choice what to do. All right, they could live by the commandments. And the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. On it you shall do no manner of work, not you, not your son, not your daughter, nor your servants, nor the animals in your home, nor the stranger within your gates. For in 6 days God made heaven and earth and sea and all that is them, and God rested on the seventh day. Okay, so when the Jewish people left Egypt and settled in the land of Israel, and they were no longer slaves, they honored the fact that they weren't slaves anymore, that they were free people, by celebrating the Sabbath from Friday night till Saturday night. All right, and this was a long, 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Yeah?
What time did it start?
It starts at sunset. Today, though many Sabbath customs have changed since ancient times, the Sabbath feeling is still the same. In many Jewish homes, the table is laid with a fine cloth on Friday night. The Sabbath dinner is the best of the week. Just before the sun goes down, the mother or someone else in the family lights the Sabbath candles. Softly, all say the blessings over them. And hopefully you guys have some Jewish friends that recognize the Sabbath and you can get invited over, because that's really neat. The blessings are recited in Hebrew. They are thank yous to God. They thank God for the Torah and for the Sabbath, the day of rest. They thank God for life and home and family and the good food on the table. They say good Sabbath, or Shabbat Shalom, which means Sabbath, peace to you. Then everyone eats the good things and celebrates the Sabbath and the day of rest. Some people rest by closing their eyes and thinking. Do any of you guys rest that way?
Well, then I fall asleep.
Then you fall asleep. That's what happens to me. Then I fall asleep too. Some rest by walking. All right, that's a good way to rest. Or visiting friends, or reading, or playing. Resting means being free to just be. A person thinks a little bigger on the Sabbath. A person stands a little taller on the Sabbath. A person is a person on the Sabbath. They're free to just be. So that is our story of Shabbat. And now we are going to go to our classes. So thank you very much.
Let us join together in a short time of silent meditation. Sit back, relax. Take a few deep breaths, and in this time together, let the wisdom of silence be among us. Namaste. Amen and blessed be. There's a Zen Buddhist proverb that you may be familiar with. It says, you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day, unless you're too busy. Then you should sit for an hour. The busier our lives are, the more we need time to be still. And so it seems that the faster life gets, the tighter our schedules are, the more we need to take time for Sabbath. I titled this morning's sermon, Remember the Sabbath, as a sort of double entendre. The phrase comes up this way in reference to the Ten Commandments that we heard about earlier in our children's story. From Exodus, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, or your livestock, or the visitor within your gates. I also chose this phrase, remember the Sabbath, as the title of the sermon as a question. Remember the Sabbath? Do you remember when Sundays were set aside? Or some other day, perhaps, if you grew up in a different tradition? Do you remember when you had time, when everyone seemed to understand that it was good to take time to live? Not to do more, but to live and enjoy life with your family. Taking time to just be with family was good. It is good. We need it now, perhaps more than ever. And it's not just a part of the Jewish tradition, it's part of our human need, our human experience. I was really interested to learn this week just how widespread and similar the day of rest and reflection is for our human family. The spiritual traditions celebrate some form of Sabbath in many different ways. Before Hebrews, the Babylonians celebrated a lunar Sabbath, also a day of rest. That was 4,000 years ago, and a different calendar that inspired that Jewish tradition. And Buddhists use a lunar calendar for the Sabbath. Every full, quarter, and new moon, the monks and lay people deepen their practice a little bit, and they share food on those days, and they take time for learning together. It's amazing how this clockwork seems to have worked itself out in very different communities. It's deeply rooted in the spiritual traditions that we draw from. So today, I want to talk both about those traditions of the past and how they can inform our lives today as Unitarian Universalists. How can you and I take time out of our busy lives to reorient ourselves, to touch the ground and reach for the sky? Time to remember what it means to be human. We know the Sabbath is a day for resting. Sabbath is a time not only to not work, but a time not to do chores, a time not to argue, and apparently a time not to worry. Sabbath, perhaps best of all, we understand Sabbath to be a time with the holy through a negative definition, those things that are prohibited. Sometimes it's a lot easier to describe the holy by what it's not rather than by what it is. There's a whole line of theology called apophatic theology, and it exists in Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam. So recognizing that knowing exactly what the holy is pretty much impossible, these folks just start by describing what God is not. There's a great history of exploring the holy by what it is not. It's a tradition that actually should resonate pretty well with us as Unitarian Universalists. A good many of us are atheists and agnostics. We UUs often have a hard time pinning down what God is. We have a much easier time, though, knowing what God is not. We know that if God exists, God is not sitting in the clouds somewhere making decisions like a puppet master. We know that holy is not jealous or judging. We know that holy is not hatred or war. Holiness isn't a collection of right words or prescribed deeds. We, UUs, find it easier to talk about what the holy is not. Doesn't it make sense, then, that we could begin to define time dedicated to the holy by prohibiting some unholy activities? The Sabbath's prohibition from distracting activities isn't meant as a big sacrifice or a punishment. It's just a recognition that even when we don't know exactly what God is, we do know that those other things that distract our minds and our hearts can be set aside for a time to be with the holy. By removing some of the busyness of doing, we make space for the holiness of being still. Sabbath isn't just an ancient prohibition of work on a particular day of the week. It's also not a day off of work to run errands that you weren't able to catch during the week. While it may feel good to scratch those errands off your list, I actually keep a paper list because it feels so good. That's not the sort of renewal that I'm speaking of. In fact, it's the opposite of errands. Sabbath is the opposite and perhaps the antidote of busyness. Our culture seems more and more to be steeped in an obsession with activity. You know what I'm talking about. It's the incessant need to be in meetings or building something or creating something or driving somewhere or doing something, eking out every minute of productivity. We UUs have this custom of having a check-in at the beginning of our meetings often. It's a time for sharing how your week was and how you're feeling there in that moment. I've noticed over the years, though, that often we greet one another with a list of our overscheduled activities. We list them and seek acknowledgement for it, as if overscheduling our lives and living on fumes is a badge of honor. And my ministerial colleagues may be the worst about this of all. Busyness is nothing to be proud of. It's a symptom of poor planning and perpetual distraction from our priorities. Sabbath is more than time without work. It's time carved out to tap into deeper sources of meaning. It's time for peace, calm, love, clarity. So indulge me for just a moment while I geek out on some biblical details about Sabbath. In the Jewish tradition, the idea of Sabbath is anchored in Genesis. That's where it first comes about. It says in Genesis, on the seventh day, God finished his work. And we often misunderstand that finishing. I was reading up about Sabbath. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's kind of the preeminent scholar on Sabbath, talks about how we misunderstood that finishing of work. He says there was something to finish on that seventh day. It wasn't just being tired and stopping. On that seventh day, rabbis conclude that God created Menua. Menua, the Hebrew word which we mistakenly think means rest, means a whole lot more than just stopping. It comes up over and over in the Hebrew Bible. It's synonymous with tranquility, with serenity, with peace. It's the state that Job described that he was longing for in his horrible story of faith trial. It's a state without strife or fighting. It's a state without fear or distress. Menua is the stillness of the Psalm, of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. That we might first encounter Sabbath as a prohibition from work, it's much more than an absence. Sabbath is a time to be with the holy. On Sundays, this hour is sacred because we come here and make it so. But in the rest of our lives, what time do you make sacred by recognizing it as such? It doesn't have to be more than a few minutes now and then. Sabbath doesn't require any special equipment or skill. That's what's brilliant about it. It can happen at any day of the week, at any time. You don't have to go anywhere. The key is taking time and consciously understanding that time as different, as a time for renewal. But why? Why is he lecturing us about busyness and giving us one more thing to squeeze into our lives? It's a good question. And I think it's quite simply because we have to. We're finite beings with pretty fragile bodies and minds. Rest is a necessary part of the rhythm of our lives. All life requires a rhythm of rest. There's a rhythm in our waking activity and the body's need for sleep. There's a rhythm in the way that day dissolves into night and night into morning. There's rhythm as the active growth of spring, and summer is quieted by the necessary dormancy of fall and winter. In our bodies, our heart perceptibly rests after each beat. Our lungs rest between exhale and inhalation. Remembering the Sabbath is simply remembering that we are a part of a rhythm of life. It doesn't say obey the Sabbath. It doesn't say participate in the Sabbath. It says remember the Sabbath. It's a recognition that the time for rest is built in, a necessary piece of life. We just have to remember it. Now, before writing this sermon, I had the tendency to describe Sabbath in a very pragmatic way. I would have said, in fact, I think I did in the newsletter, I would have said that we need to rest so that we can better perform in the rest of our lives. Through deeper reflection on Sabbath this week, though, I came to realize that formulation was completely backwards. We don't rest so that we can labor. We labor so that we can, every once in a while, rest with the ones that we love. 6 days of the week we toil and tarry so that we can set aside one day to do what we're meant to do. To be with the ones that we love, to be at peace, to be in the presence of the holy. Sabbath is not a means of making our lives more productive. Our work is the means to provide us an opportunity to be whole, even if it's for a short moment. So the question also arises, why not? Why aren't we all on board with this practice? Why don't we take time for healing and wholeness? My guess is that when we really pause, when we take a moment out, the silence and stillness is really scary. We fear that when we let our identity go beyond busyness, there may be nothing left. It can be scary when we turn off the din of constant noise and visual stimulation. We come to a quiet emptiness. That was one of the things that, being a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I could share with other returned volunteers. Being in the Peace Corps is wonderful, but it's also very isolating. When you're the only American in a village for months and months, you spend a huge amount of time alone. In that quiet, you get to know yourself very well, which can be a good thing, and it can be very unsettling. Silence is uncomfortable, not just because we socially don't know what to do with it. It's uncomfortable because it brings us face to face with a void. Spirituality is not for the faint of heart, after all. Facing the quiet, the void, can be scary business. But that's why we come here, to face that mystery together. And when we do face the quiet together, we're reminded of the person underneath the busyness. We're reminded that every soul is sacred. We're reminded that there's an interdependent web of life that supports us and everyone that we love. In the quiet, we found a new foundation. We find peace. I want to spend the remaining short time that we have talking about what practicing the Sabbath might look like. We can start with the spiritual practice that we all share in common, coming to Tapestry. Carving out this time to come to worship is a huge piece of remembering the Sabbath. Just coming to church, though, doesn't quite make it a time of rest. I love the commitment of our volunteers at Tapestry. We wouldn't be a viable congregation if it weren't for the hard work that people put in. At the same time, though, I occasionally worry. Instead of being a sanctuary, this place can very easily become another source of busyness, an unending to-do list that distracts us from the task of being still. As I said earlier, Sabbath isn't just about a particular time or period in the week. You can hold sacred time any day of the week. Maybe find a candle that holds special meaning to you. It doesn't have to be a chalice. Those are handy symbols, but any candle will do. When you have a little bit of time, maybe before a meal or before meditation or simply reading, Set a candle in front of you and say a simple blessing for yourself or someone that you love, and light the candle. Take a few breaths. For just that moment, let the hurry of your world fall away. Or maybe have a Sabbath meal. Shop for ingredients that bring you pleasure. It's not a meal necessarily to challenge you with a new recipe that's a whole lot of work. It's not a luxurious fine dining experience. But take as much time as you need to feel and taste and smell the ingredients, all of the spices, the vegetables, and decorate the table for yourself and for those that you care about. Your very own body actually has all the tools you need for a moment of Sabbath, anywhere, anytime. Probably the most beautiful form of meditation that we all do every day is breathing and paying attention to that breathing. Just let yourself become aware of the physical sensation of breathing in and out. And feel that rhythm. When your mind wanders, which it will undoubtedly do, come back to your breathing. And if you feel like taking a longer Sabbath, then lengthen the time. Of course, a lot of us find refuge in nature. As I said earlier, rest is a part of nature and creation. Sabbath time beats in synchronicity with the rhythms of nature. So set aside a period of time and walk, or bike, or sail, or even take a nap. Anything that allows your body to be soothed by the nourishment of the earth. Whether you do it alone or with other people, in silence, in nature, reading a book, cooking a meal, or just in a short moment of lighting a candle, know that you are worth the time. You're worth taking the time to touch the earth and reach for the sky and remember what it means to be human, to be connected. Make your time sacred and remember the Sabbath. Amen.
We extinguish this flame, knowing that the light remains in the warmth and compassion of our hearts until we are together again.
If you would take the hand of someone near you for these closing words. That which is worth doing, create with your hands. That which is worthy of repeating, speak with your clear voice. That which is worthy of remembering, hold in your hearts. And that which is worthy of living, go and live it now. Go in peace and let the light within you be a blessing to the world.
Truth and like Esther, may you be deserving of praise. Strengthen them, O Lord, and keep them from the stranger's ways. May God bless you and grant you long lives. May God make you good mothers and wives. May the Lord protect and defend you. May the Lord preserve you from pain. Favor them, O Lord, with happiness and peace. Oh, hear our Sabbath prayer. Amen. May the Lord protect and defend you. May He always shield you from shame. May you come to be in paradise a shining name. May you be like Ruth and like Esther. May you be deserving of praise. Strengthen them, O Lord, and keep them from the stranger's ways. May God bless you and grant you long lives. May God make you good mothers, and may He send you husbands who will care for you. May the Lord protect and defend you. May the Lord preserve